Today we're going to continue working with reported speech, but this time we're going to focus on reported questions. This is a very useful structure because in everyday life, we often explain questions that another person asked us. For example, after a conversation with a friend, teacher, or colleague, we usually report their questions to another person. First, remember that in reported speech, we normally use verbs like ask or want to know. For example, she asked me if I was tired, or he wanted to know where I lived. Just like in reported statements, the tense often changes one step back into the past. This is called backshift. Now, there are three main types of reported questions: yes/no questions, choice questions, and question word questions. Let's begin with yes/no questions. These are questions that can be answered with yes or no. In reported speech, we introduce them with if or whether. Whether is slightly more formal, but both are correct. For example, if somebody asks, "Are you hungry?" we report it as, "She asked me if I was hungry." Notice that the verb changes from are to was because of backshift. Another example, "Do you want dinner?" becomes, "They wanted to know whether we wanted dinner." Now let's look at choice questions. These questions offer two or more options. We also use if or whether here. For example, "Do you prefer tea or coffee?" becomes, "He asked me whether I preferred tea or coffee." Or, "Is the hotel expensive or cheap?" becomes, "She asked if the hotel was expensive or cheap." Again, the structure changes from question form to normal sentence form. The third type is question word questions, with words like what, where, when, why, who, or how. In these cases, we keep the question word, but the word order changes. For example, "Where are you going?" becomes, "He asked me where I was going." Another example, "Why are you upset?" becomes, "She asked why I was upset." Notice something very important here. After reporting the question, it is no longer a direct question, so we do not use question word order anymore. This is one of the biggest differences students need to remember. In direct questions, the verb often comes before the subject. For example, "Where are you going?" But in reported questions, the subject comes before the verb, "where I was going." The same happens with "What are you doing?" which becomes, "He asked what I was doing." Another important rule is that we usually do not use the auxiliary verb do in reported questions. For example, "What do you want?" changes to "She asked me what I wanted." We remove do, or "How do you feel?" becomes "He asked me how I felt." However, in some negative questions, the auxiliary can remain. For example, "Who doesn't like chocolate?" becomes, "She asked who didn't like chocolate." In this case, didn't stays because it is part of the negative structure. We also need to pay attention to pronouns and time expressions, just like in normal reported speech. For example, "Are you meeting your friends tomorrow?" becomes, "She asked me if I was meeting my friends the next day." Here, tomorrow changes to the next day. Let's use some vocabulary about personality and character. Imagine someone asks, "Why is your brother so quiet?" In reported speech, we say, "She asked why my brother was so quiet." Or, "Is your teacher strict or easygoing?" becomes, "He asked whether my teacher was strict or easygoing." Another example could be, "Who is the most reliable person in your family?" which changes to "She asked who the most reliable person in my family was." So to finish, remember these key ideas. With reported questions, we usually use ask or wanted to know. For yes, no, and choice questions, we use if or whether. For question word questions, we keep the question word. We also change the word order to normal sentence order, and we usually remove the auxiliary do.